I'm Aaron McKim, Assistant Professor in Ag, Food, and Natural Resources Education here at Michigan State University and co-author on this research project. So the first section of our methods will talk about who we asked and who responded to our survey. We asked agriculture teachers in the state of Michigan in 2018-2019, those who taught in that school year. There were 131 Michigan ag teachers who we asked to respond to the survey, and we got 47 responses back for a 35.88% response rate. The second section with regards to the methods is what questions did we ask them? And we really had 5 different chunks of our survey. The first one was a needs assessment related to these new and emerging ag, food, and natural resources technologies. We had a section about curricular inclusion where we essentially asked them, yes or no, do you incorporate each of those 15 new and emerging technologies within your practice? We had a section about methods of teaching where if they had said, yes, I teach drones, for example, we said, well, what do you do to teach that? Is it brainstorm, lecture, small group, role play, and so on, so we could capture what they were doing to teach those different new and emerging technologies. And we had a question about student engagement where we had them, again, if they had taught that new and emerging technology, how engaged were students while they were teaching it? We used 50 as a benchmark to say that's your average student engagement in the courses you teach, and 100 is extremely engaged, and 0 is no engagement, and had a measure kind of between on that scale student engagement while they were teaching those new and emerging technologies. And then we had a demographics question to learn a little bit more about the teachers who did respond to our survey. That's the third element of the methods, is learning a little bit more about who it was that responded to our survey. We had slightly more female than male teachers respond, 56.7% female. They averaged 42.34 years of age. Most of them, 66.6%, had a master's degree, 29.9% for a bachelor's degree. 60% completed a traditional teacher education program, and 63.3% taught in rural communities, followed by suburban 30% and urban 6.7%. And as far as program size, the average was 95.63 unduplicated students within the programs for the teachers who responded. So that's a little bit about our methods for this research project. So as far as our theoretical framework for this project, we were interested in teachers teaching new and emerging technologies within their curriculum. And we conceptualized this as a change from the traditional way or traditional content that they teach. And so recognizing that change and that adoption of this change, our theoretical framework was the diffusion of innovations theory, a commonly used theory in agricultural education research, or research that we'll see here at AAAE. What we were interested in is the process that teachers go through as they adopt this innovation, and found through the diffusion of innovations theory the 5-step process that they call the innovation decision process. So starts with awareness and knowledge of the innovation. They form a positive or negative attitude. They decide whether to adopt or reject the innovation. They implement it, and then they get confirmation of their implementation decision. And so as we operationalize that within our study, we were really interested in what's the process, obviously, that teachers go through, and how can we understand their perceptions of these new and emerging technologies through our needs assessment? How can we understand, for those who have adopted this innovation, the student engagement piece, so we can get that information about their adoption process, or the innovation adoption process that our teachers went through that we were interested in this study. So as we think about in our study how we operationalize the diffusion of innovations theory, we were interested again in this innovation decision that our teachers went through. And we try to capture pieces of that innovation decision. For example, we asked teachers had they adopted the curriculum. It was obviously a piece of their adoption decision. We conducted a needs assessment, or to gauge their interest or their excitement about the innovation, as well as student engagement, which is a piece of that decision confirmation, as we saw in the innovation decision process. So really trying to pick apart and understand teachers as they go through this adoption of teaching new and emerging technologies within their curriculum, as guided by the diffusion of innovations theory.
I'm Lauren King, student researcher and co-author on this project. I'll be covering our discussion and conclusions. We'll delve into each of our 4 research objectives and how the results that we received indicate what happens in those objectives. So our first research objective, we were exploring the perceived needs of teachers using a needs assessment approach. And our weighted discrepancy scores, our mean weighted discrepancy scores, illustrated the perceived needs of these teachers. We had 10 that come to the top in areas of identified need. So the three of those technologies directly interacted with the biological aspects of AFNR. These 3 were genetic modification, rapid iterative selective breeding, and synthetic biology. Those 3 in the top 10 had that shared characteristic, while the remaining 7 that filled up the top 10 were all focused on computer programs for data management. We disseminated this down and found that Michigan AFNR educators are focused on data management and transfer technologies. That's what the primary interest lies in the primary areas of need following our survey. We found that AFNR educators have a high importance for data management technologies, but they are not prepared to incorporate them into their classroom in regards to content. We had some explanations for this, including that the technologies might be incredibly expensive and unavailable to implement into the classroom, or that teacher training foundations provide more application when it comes to biological technologies, but not as much when it comes to computer-based technologies and incorporating them into the classroom. Our 3 lowest ranked needs were in vertical farming, in value-added processes, and closed ecological systems. We classified these technologies as on-farm management methods or ways of thinking about the entirety of an operation. And an understanding of these operations, which led to that smaller score, could be due to the compatibility of the innovations with existing norms, which is a characteristic of innovations that Rogers highlights as important and useful in application. That covers our first objective. For our second, third, and fourth objectives, we had curricular inclusion, methods of teaching, and then student engagement, which were each evaluated separately. For our curricular inclusion assessment, we found that only 5 of the 15 new and emerging AFNR technologies were actually being taught by the majority of respondents. These technologies were genetic modification, value-added processes, precision agricultural sensors, vertical farming, and satellite imaging. Our findings found that a large proportion of the new and emerging AFNR technologies were not being addressed in any form in the majority of AFNR classrooms. And additionally, we found that the technologies that had adoption advantages, i.e. that they were compatible with existing norms or had easy experimentation incorporation into the classroom. So we found that those technologies were more likely to be incorporated rather than the lesser adopted technologies, which might not have compatible characteristics found within the innovations theory. However, 11 out of the 15 technologies had higher than average student engagement when surveying the teachers. So teachers are more likely to perceive a confirmation of their implementation decision if they choose to incorporate any of the technologies into the classroom. We also found that with our teaching methods that were discussed during the research survey, there was a reliance on lecture in the majority of presentations, regardless of the technology being discussed. Our final area on the paper is our recommendations. So what we believe should be incorporated into AFNR classrooms, trainings, etc. Our first recommendation would be to replicate this study on a state-by-state basis to determine if these concerns and the needs of teachers are limited to one state, are state-specific, or are found in similar presentations across the entire country. We also recommend getting student surveys so that we can determine student reactions to multiple teaching methods when it comes to these new and emerging technologies, so teachers have a better grasp on what methods are best to incorporate when teaching the technologies in question. We also recommend a barrier-based assessment to determine why late majority and laggard teachers are less likely to incorporate the new and emerging technologies and what barriers prevent them from bringing them into their classrooms. There also is a chance for future research and the correlation between exposure to a technology and then later incorporation into an AFNR curriculum. Using exposure to these technologies through teacher trainings or certification workshops, if this exposure is able to impact how teachers perceive the technologies and then in turn incorporate them into their classrooms and into their coursework.